Willkommen zurück, liebe TeilnehmerInnen, nach einer ersten Tageshälfte, die Sie hoffentlich in einen richtig schönen Festival-Flow versetzt hat. Dear participants from all over the world, welcome back after an inspiring first half of the day, which hopefully has established a sort of festival mood. Today, an average of 150 people from many countries worldwide participated again. And now we are heading towards this weekend and hope to attract even more participants. If you like our festival and want to support us, please feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about Latitude. We would be delighted if as many people as possible could join. For those of you who have just joined us, let me pass over briefly some organizational information. And for those who stayed with us, please excuse the repetition. So, you can find detailed information and available translations on the festival website. And we also have provided a FAQ on the website in German and English. Plus, we offer a radio program, Latitude, on air, streaming on Reboot FM. For those who do not know the residency program at the Villa Sul in Salvador de Bahia as yet, during the festival, you can see a digital exhibition on our website, as the residency artists were unfortunately not able to work there because of the pandemic. At 17:15 Central European Time, you can see a live conversation with 4 filmmakers, of which one is a residency artist in the Villa Sul. The talk will be in Portuguese, which will be simultaneously translated into English. Then at 6 p.m. Central European Time, you can watch an impressive video with the title The Morning Citizen by Trixie Munyama, after which I will have the pleasure to speak with Vichitwa Jiharine, who is one of the co-creators of this piece. Please feel invited to participate with your questions in the public Q&A on the available social media channels, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. But first and up next, we will now stream a live debate about visions for museums with the activating title, How Museums Move into the Future. There are already 6 wonderful guests, historians and art experts from all over the world waiting to start. The host is Tonya Nelson, chair of the International Council of Museums in the UK, who has been leading efforts in the UK to promote new visions for equality in museums. I will see you again at 18:30 Central European Time, together with my guest, Vichitwa Jiharine. And now I really feel a little bit like in the European Song Contest. Somebody said that yesterday. I hand over to Tonya Nelson. Tonya, are you there?
I am.
Hi.
Here I am.
Hi. Have
How
fun.
are you?
Good luck.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
I am very well. I'm very well. I'm very excited. Such an exciting time. And I'm looking forward to your discussion. I say hi to Léontine if she's there. Have fun together. Hi, Léontine.
Fantastic. Well, you know, it's my pleasure really to be able to host this session on the future of museums. I had the chance to sit in on the festival yesterday, and I was so impressed with the richness of the content and the variety of formats. So I hope today we can live up to that high bar that's already been set.
You will, I'm very sure. So I have to leave now, otherwise I get into trouble with the technical team. So I say goodbye. Have a good discussion, live debate. See you again. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to start with our session, and we're going to try to do a little bit something different with our session. We are going to have a series of what I would call conversations between 2 or 3 people who are part of our guest panel today. So we'll take those in succession. And my thought was really, you know, I'm living in the UK and I work in the UK, but I'm doing my lockdown in Stuttgart in Germany. And one of the things that I find really interesting about German culture is this cake and coffee in the afternoon. So people stop between 3 and 4 o'clock and have cake and coffee and have a chat. And so I thought we would have a format that kind of feels like that, even though I don't have any cake, I have some coffee. And I know my colleagues across the world are at different time zones, so it's not cake and coffee time, but we want to give that feeling of having a conversation. And I'm really, really pleased for the first conversation to have Léontine Meijer-van Mensch, who is director of the ethnographic collections of Saxony, and has a long and impressive career within museums. She was previously program director of the Jewish Museum in Berlin and deputy director of the Museum of European Cultures in Berlin. She's a lecturer and she's active in many, many boards, including the executive board of ICOM, International Council of Museums. So we have collaborated in the concept within ICOM, but we also are leaders within museums ourselves. So really happy to talk to you and have a conversation about the future of museums. Now, what we thought might be good is to start to frame this entire conversation with the proposed new definition that ICOM put forth last year. It hasn't been approved yet, it's in proposal stage, but it solicited lots of discussion. And we thought then that's a really good way to start this discussion. So I'm going to read out the new proposed definition, but we also have a slide that shows it so you can read it because it's actually quite long. So for those in the technical office, if you could now show the definition, the slide on the ICOM definition, I will read it out. I'm hoping it's on the screen now. I can't see it. But the new definition, I think on the slide you have the old definition and you have the new definition. So the new definition is museums are democratizing, inclusive, polyphonic spaces for critical dialogue about the past and the future. Acknowledging and addressing the conflicts and challenges of the present, they hold artifacts and specimens in trust for society, safeguard diverse memories for the future generations, and guarantee equal rights and equal access to heritage for all people. Museums are not for profit. They are participatory and transparent and work in active partnership with and for diverse communities to collect, preserve, research, interpret, exhibit, enhance understanding of the world, aiming to contribute to human dignity and social justice, global equality, and planetary well-being. So with that, Léontine, so glad to see you.
Very, very nice seeing you, although I don't have coffee and I don't have cake.
I'm sorry, I didn't get there in time. I sent some to you.
We can't have it all, can we?
So just to kick off, if this definition were to be approved, what do you think that would say about the future of museums and kind of what we can expect from the future of museums?
Well, first of all, although we are both part of the ICOM community, my perspective today will be of a museum director or a reflexive practitioner within the German museum context, and now the director of the second largest ethnographical collection in Germany. And I find the future a difficult concept in this one, because we of course don't know what the future will be. And I also, we need to be realistic. Museums won't change the world. However, I think museums help people playing their role in shaping society by being places for critical dialogue. And I think the proposed definition was about that. It was very much about that. Museums facilitate positions, museums as agencies, museums that are not neutral. And I think in the old definition, it's that is still reflecting on old structures and old paradigms, and again, sort of critically reflecting on your concept of future, what we see in this proposed definition, it's not so new, it's not future oriented, it's what museum life and especially museum discourse has been for more or less 30 to 40 years. So I would say it's very much a mainstream museum discourse that maybe is not always, unfortunately, museum practice. And with this museum definition, we could have or proposal, we could have put that in place. And for me, as a museum director, this proposal would have benefited me not only now but also in the future, in my already current day practices. It reflects on new relational ethics, what is very much also a thing in the Savoir and SAR report. Of course, it helps museums to really get into the stages of thinking and acting on issues of repatriation and restitution. I mean, that also was in this proposal. And therefore, it's also very interesting to reflect on the fact why it wasn't approved yet. You know?
Yeah.
And of course, this definition is also very much you know, being a facilitator, being a platform, mediating between different voices within society, and that was for me and is still a very inspirational text.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you that I think museums are on the pathway towards this. And so for some museums, this definition won't be very radical, but for others, it will be extremely radical. And, when I see in the old definition is, statements like permanent, which I know what was intended by that, but the permanency and the whole idea of education and, study gives you that impression of the museum is there to transmit information to you. You are the receiver. It's a very rigid and very static place. And that probably wasn't the intention of the original definition, but the new one has so much more activity, so much more energy behind it. And for me, with a definition like this, it holds the opportunity for instance, since I'm originally from the United States, and one of the places I'd love to go when I was growing up was the beauty salon or the barbershop, because all the conversations would happen there would be fantastic. You would talk about the issues of the day. Everybody would have their opinion. It was fun, but it was a place for debate. And it was, and what if museums could feel that comfortable, that like it's a place where you really could go and debate the questions of the day? I think we're also, we're used to using digital technology to kind of voice our opinions, but it's also, it's either you're on this side or you're on that side. It gets very contentious very easily. And I think where museums are very strong is being able to suss out the nuances of things and to say, it's not exactly that, it's somewhat like that, but not exactly. And society really needs a place where those kind of subtleties and nuances can come through. And so, in a sense, the definition to me provides a pathway to that. But it will require shifts in mindset in some people. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what is the kind of mindset that needs to change in order for museums to kind of be able to move into the future in a way that we've both talked about.
Oh, mindsets, again, a difficult word. And you can look at that, of course, from many perspectives. But let me reflect on professionalism, and that I think that we need to reconsider what museum professionalism is. and therefore what expertise is, and what knowledge is, and what other knowledges are that need to be taken into the narrative, into the museum. Um, and what you're saying about the barbershop, or it's the well in the city center where people gather around. It's this idea of agora, or you could say, if you want to be a bit more theoretical, the so-called third space, right? That's what you're referring to. And that needs a shift from being an expert on a specific subject matter that sends information and educates the people in a person that has a certain toolbox, a sort of methodological toolbox, and says, hey, I'm going to help you with my toolbox so you can express your own narratives. So it's being this mediator, facilitator. Therefore, of course, the whole learning in museums has become more and more important, and that's actually also what this museum, a new proposal, is all about. It's all about learning. It's about interpretation. It's about museums as storytellers, embracing this multifocality. And that needs a shift from what is for us expertise, and therefore, as I said, I'm just repeating myself, professionalism, and that's pretty scary. That's scary for a lot of people, and I always thought that was a generational thing, but it's not. It's not a generational thing. It's a particular set of um, the way you perceive academic knowledge, uh, the way you perceive institutions like museums, and I see them, of course, as centers of knowledge, of interpretation, of deep thinking, but also very much spaces of dialogue, and coming together. And we still, I think, frame them as specific qualities that people have in specific um, parts of the museum, but it's actually, I think, a heterogeneous new perspective on professionalism that everybody in the museum needs to have. So it's not something that you can sort of delegate to the educational department.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. You kind of stole my answer to this question in a sense, because I do think there's something about how we think about expertise, because I think there's a value in, expertise that comes through long formal academic study, but there's also something about expertise in terms of lived experience. And I think now we don't have a very good language in the world about talking about different types of expertise and contributions. So on one hand, at least in the United States, let's put UK and the United States in one thing, which is, there is this battle against, being an expert is bad somehow. But, we know with COVID-19, we need the scientists to tell us the facts. We need somebody who can tell us the facts, and we should be able to rely on those people. But at the same time, we need space for everybody to be able to contribute their lived experience and their own personal history. And we need to find a way to have a value system that can accept both, and can understand what facts are, and experience is, and kind of negotiate that whole thing. So I certainly think, and I think that will have an impact, as you say, on professionalism within the museums, and like, what does our staff look like? How are they trained? How are curators trained? How are other staff trained? How are there new roles that we need within museums in terms of people with the skills to engage communities and build partnerships and collaborations? Many people who are maybe coming from a more traditional museum environment would not have had those kinds of skills in the past. So I think also it's about those kind of new skill sets.
Yeah, that is what I meant with this methodological toolbox, in a way.
Yes, completely agree. So the final question I have, just to kind of tie things up, and hopefully, I forgot to say this up front, we do want to try to take at least maybe one question after each conversation, but it may be that we have to push it to the end, but let's see how we go. But the final question is, who's doing interesting things that kind of relate to the future vision of museums? Are there any examples you'd bring up from your own experience, which is, quite deep experience, or from other examples that you would like to share with the audience?
For a German context, I could of course say, well, what is now happening in Dresden at the state art collections and what Marion Ackermann is doing it was for me the reason to come to her institution. But that's a bit corny. But I feel that especially in the field of city museums or community neighboring museums like the Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg Museum, there are a lot of interesting initiatives. The museum in the city of Frankfurt, the new historical museum, which is so deeply participatory on the one hand, and really being this in the city center of Frankfurt, where people can discuss and negotiate and come together. And on the other hand, it's still a museum with in-deep expert knowledge on medals in Frankfurt from the 17th century. So I also don't believe in this dichotomy that it's either or, but that of course in a museum context, those two things can also come together. And I experience a lot of interesting, or I've witnessed a lot of interesting museum kind of institutions that probably won't fit into the old museum definition, but maybe in the new one, that are much more liquid, that are collaborating with local archives, with libraries, with community centers, with participatory collecting strategies, and those interesting non-classical museum spaces are, I think, developing an interesting methodology that can be maybe not one-to-one, but at least be an example for the larger institutional thinkers. So, for example, Imagine I See in Amsterdam, which is not an archive, it's not a library, it's not a museum, it's somewhere, and it's not a social hub as well. It's none of the above, and it's all of the above, and they're doing amazing inspirational work. So I really can say to everybody, look at what Imagine I See is doing in Amsterdam.
Great, fantastic, good. I mean, for myself, I'm actually just going to talk about a personal experience that kind of gave me a nugget, a little taste of what could happen in the future. Several years ago, I was managing a really small Egyptian collection at University College London called the Petrie Museum. And we were approached by the Egyptian government to help them set up a new educational center using some of our collections. And we very, very, we're really happy to collaborate with them. And we decided to start a community exhibition development group. So we brought in people who were immigrants from Egypt living in London to help us co-create an exhibition. And I know there's tons of examples of co-creation and co-exhibition design out there. That's not particularly new. But what happened to us during the process of developing this new space with these collaborators is the Arab Spring. And suddenly the conversation just became so different. And actually these people who are working with us on an exhibition said, oh, okay, I know we're working on the exhibition, but could we use your space to debate how we're gonna react to the Arab Spring? Like what's gonna be our contribution? What is the future of Egypt? And we were like, yeah, go ahead and use this space for that. And it felt, what was really nice about it is because they felt comfortable in the space. They felt that they could ask to use the space for something that wasn't directly relevant to the collections, but through the exhibition they were doing, they were thinking about issues of identity and history and all those things. So they wanted to carry on that conversation in a slightly less traditional museum form. But I felt very inspired by the fact that they felt the space was theirs and that they could use it. And so, it's funny because I think that happened because I was in a small museum that was a university-based museum. And so we were allowed to let that happen without it being formalized. I think in museums, we have so many things that are formalized into projects, programs. Okay, we need to add, we need to ask for the money for this or that. This is the UK, US, maybe perspective. And by the time
it's also a very German perspective, I must say.
Okay, and so by the time you get the money for a formal program and then it begins and it ends, and it's like you can't build long-term relationships like that. You need more, as you say, fluidity, in relationships, and you need to be able to be empowered to have that fluidity, to have communities be part of your organization in lots of different ways.
Yeah, maybe one more thing. It's all, I think, about building up relationships, and you can only build up relationships that are sustainable if there's trust, mutual trust. And one thing which is standing in the way of so many innovative processes is it's all about project money. So there's no sustainability, and without the lack of sustainability, how can you build up trust and relationships? Yep. So let's work on that together for our future museum model.
Okay, so I think we have a time for one question. This is from Jean-Baptiste Hochquillen. I can't read it very well, from YouTube. The question is about hiring and HR policy. How will museums become these fluid spaces when they are still hiring the same kind of academic types? Typically, advertisement for a museum job comes with a list of academic credentials you must have. We all know this. Do you have any thoughts about the future of kind of hiring, or what's your thoughts about for your museum, maybe how you bring people in with maybe different backgrounds?
Well, what I try to do now in my museums, and that's the good thing of being a director, that you can sort of change the process, is indeed look differently towards biographies, towards the so-called academic, to let a multifocality in the museum space, which is in general, of course, for an ethnographical context enormously important, also in relation to cultural diversity. But if you can't do it with the staff immediately, there's also a different way of governance, and a sort of shared mutual ownership that you can have with lots of communities, source communities, but in general communities of interest, communities of implication, the people around your museum space, boards, and that's something that is a new ethical governing that is very much needed, especially in Germany, where most of the museum people, or people that work in museums, they're old. And nothing against the old, and old and young, it's also a mindset. But in a German context, me being 47, being a director is quite young. And then I always have to say, I'm 47, I'm almost 50. The young are in their 20s or in the beginning of their 30s. So it's and that's so beautiful in being in this position of power, that you can take position and try to change the system. And it's a long process and also frustrating, but I think that's what we need to do as museum people, especially the ones in such places. And that was also something that was engraved in this new museum definition proposal. And that's why it is so so frustrating that it was postponed in Kyoto.
We're going to have to leave it there, actually. That's a good way to kind of wrap it up and bring it back to the beginning, which was the ICOM definition. Thank you so much, Léontine, for the conversation. I hope soon we'll be able to have cake and coffee together in person.
I hope. I'm counting on it, my dear.
Yes. Good. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're now going to go on to our next conversation. I hopefully have with me Manuela Bauche and Keyna Eleison, who will focus on the involvement of civil society and the role of the public as it relates to memory politics. So Manuela is a historian with a focus on the history of colonialism and life sciences of the 19th and 20th century. Since 2019, Manuela has been director of a project on examining the historical and political history of a building on Ehrenstrasse. I think this was the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Eugenics, yes, that she's been studying. And she's also a member of the steering committee of the project Post-Colonial Remembrance in the City. So welcome, Manuela.
Thank you.
And then we also have with us Keyna Eleison, who's a curator, a writer, a love researcher, an heiress girl, a shaman, a narrator, a singer, and an ancient chronicler. Fantastic profile there. She's a member of the African Heritage Commission for the designation of the Valongo Wharf region as a World Heritage Site via UNESCO, and is a curator of the 10th Sci-Art International Biennial that will be taking place in Bolivia. And she's currently a professor of the Free Learning Program at the Park Long School of Visual Arts in Rio. Are you joining us from Rio?
Yes.
Okay.
What? Sorry?
Are you, Keyna, are you in Rio right now?
Yes, I'm in Rio.
And Manuela's in Berlin.
That's right, yes.
Welcome. So, you know what? I'm going to ask you the same questions from your perspective of thinking about how the public can be involved in this idea of memory institutions. So Manuela, do you want to start with just talking about what the future could look like if we had more of the public involved in this idea of shaping a memory institution or a museum?
Yes, I followed your discussion with Léontine, and I think it's a really tough question, actually. Because if I understand correctly, you're not only hinting at, not only asking what would memory institutions, museums, and so on look like if public was allowed more into these institutions, but it's basically asking the question, would that also, altering these institutions change society, change the world in a way? And it's a really big question, I think. And honestly, I don't know how it would change the world, but I have things I hope for, actually. And one thing I hope for is that, and it sounds a bit vague maybe, but I hope that if we would open museums, memory institutions for the public, for people who are very much connected to the histories which are being remembered in these institutions, that these people would get some rest, and that the world in a way would get some rest. And what I have in mind is the work I'm doing right now at the moment at Free University, trying to find ways to commemorate the history of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Eugenics, trying to commemorate this history in the building, the former building of this institute. And what we're doing is we're very closely working together with people, representatives from associations which are actually connected to this history. So the Central Council, Central Jewish Council, Central Council for Sinti and Roma, the Initiative of Black People in Germany, and so on. And what I found really interesting is that all of them actually said what's really important to them is that we narrate this story in a way that it also connects not only to the past, but also to the present and to present day struggles, to racism today. And when they said that, and we didn't ask them for that, it was something that came up in all the discussions we had independently from each other. And I had the impression that it was real, like an urge, and there was, and I really feel it. I mean, myself being a Black person, I really understand this urge, and there's something restless behind that. And that's why I'm saying, I hope that this restlessness will, in a way, leave us, and that we will get some rest.
Yeah.
Because people get more involved in stories which are being told, because they're telling their stories than themselves. So.
I love that concept. I love that concept of giving people rest by being able to articulate their own stories. I think that's really a fantastic concept and idea. Keyna, do you have a vision for the future? You'd like
well, first, thanks a lot, Manuela, for your words, because I'm completely with you, because we are very, very tired as a Black person that sometimes here in Brazil and some places in the world that I have been, it's very interesting to see how one person can represent the whole future and present and a people. And as a Black woman, probably you pass through this, Manuela and Tonya, as someone that can have the voice for everybody, like we are an institution. But one thing around the future that I really am concerned about is not only understand, but assume the past and the present, because sometimes we think that we need to understand, we need to decolonize, we need to undo things, but sometimes for undo things, we need to assume what happened. We need to assume what we construct to understand, and have this rest, of course, that you told, because we have this a lot of news around the violence around Black bodies in the world. Here in Brazil, we have a lot, and this news is not new. It's something that can completely be inside of a museum.
Yeah.
And assume this is a part of understanding how can we break this cycle. And I'm talking about this to talk about the future and how can we be connected with one institution that we call museum. This is very interesting because as a Black person and a Brazilian person, I have native blood and African blood inside of me and my culture, and my Portuguese is not a Portuguese from Portugal, it's a Portuguese that we built here with a lot of culture. And future, present, and past are connected, are together. And the way that we see the time is only one way. For a lot, maybe 3 or 4 African cultures, the time is completely different. We can see our future in our eyes. We can see our past in our ways. And one way to do this, I think, is around our sound. Because here we are not together, but we are together with our sound, with our vision. Because of course, sometimes our eyes are a little tired to see so many things. And so sometimes we can close our eyes and be together with our sound. The waves of the sound are together in the world now. The waves of this energy are together in the world. So connect these ways of doing and being time is something that we can give for this institution that we Europeanly call museum. We Europeanly call art. We Europeanly call story. because sometimes the story can be a life, a bird, a door, a time.
Yeah. I love that. I love that concept, though, being together in different ways, in sound and vision, and that kind of opportunity that's out there. So I'm going to stick with you, Keyna, for the second question, which is, what fundamentally has to change in the way that we think in order to make your vision come to life, for it to happen? Is it a change in the way government works? Is it the change in the way that museums operate? Is it the way, people think of museums? Like, what do you think is the fundamental shift in thinking that has to change?
It's around the structure, of course. It's around the structure. And when I say structure, I'm saying about the money and the places. How can we build these places? This architecture, engineer, and thinking around this, what we not only call in white cube, because we cannot say white cube anymore, because we need to vanish this, but this place that we think around where we're gonna keep it, this structure to keep it, what we're gonna keep it. So what I think that needs to change is to listen. The listening of the structures needs to understand how strong is big structured thing, because sometimes many, I know that this is not only in Brazil. I know because I work around the world, have many places, have many museums and cultural centers that people around it and the neighbors don't go because they don't feel invited.
Yeah.
It's not only open the door, it's open the ears. So again, to get the waves, so we need to change how we move the money inside the structure. Not to leave the money, we need money to understand things, but maybe change the place where do we have more money, not to do so many big exhibitions, maybe doing a better restroom, maybe it's better doing a better restroom than a huge exhibition. I don't know.
I really, that whole idea of kind of, thinking and starting first with your audience, the audience that you want to have, starting from there and working and putting the money that's going to get them there, as opposed to thinking, museums tend to be collections first. The first thing they think about is the collection before they think about the people. So it's kind of like shifting that paradigm a bit.
Yes, a lot of collections and empty.
Yeah. And Manuela, do you have any thoughts about what needs to change in terms of mindset?
In terms of mindset, I would say, I don't actually know if there's a translation into English for this big German word, Deutungshoheit. There's probably a word. So I think that a big problem with institutions like museums is that, you have this idea that there's the institution which is allowed to tell the main story and the master narrative, basically. And I think but this is something that is beginning to change, has begun to change anyways, in all the debates about decolonizing knowledge and so on, that museums are being attacked or questioned as institutions which position themselves as institutions which are allowed to tell any story without including other people in this narration. So I think this has to change. So apologies for not having this the English word now, but so stepping back basically from this idea of being legitimized to tell any stories. But so that's for the mindset. But at the same time, I'm very much with Keyna and also with Léontine, what she said earlier, about very straightforward things that have to change. I mean, and this is money. I mean, we always talk about money and talk about structures, as Keyna said. And I remember that Léontine said sustainability. So sustainable funding is something I believe is really fundamental for a process where we want to open up institutions, because then we're not only talking about funding projects of 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, but we're talking about installing processes, beginning processes, including people, talking with people, thinking about how we need to restructure employment situations in museums and institutions and so on. And to do that, we need, we can't think in terms of projects that have a beginning and then have an end after 2 years. We really need another funding structure, for instance. And, you know, me, myself, being based at university, we also really need, I mean, I'm not involved in a process which involves lots of different actors, institutions, and so on. And it's really difficult. But my official position is I'm a postdoc researcher. I mean, I have a contract of 2 years, and I'm expected to put forward, you know, articles for peer-reviewed journals and so on. But that's not the point in what I'm doing, actually, you know. And but it's not, university doesn't have this structure to allow for these kind of processes, actually, that we are trying to build at the moment. So it's, I think, a mix of mindset, but also structures and funding structures, which have to change fundamentally.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And having worked at a university-based museum for 9 years, certainly we certainly have to work on the kind of relationship between what universities produce in terms of knowledge and how that knowledge is introduced in society, and the kind of dialogue that happens that helps to shape the research that universities do, so that it's focusing on the right questions, and then also making sure that knowledge and that understanding coming from kind of interaction with the public also comes back out in a way that's useful to everybody, so that it's much more productive ecosystem between the university and society.
Yes.
So
can I add a short thing that comes to my mind? Because I remember that people talked about my work at the university, saying in German, "Oh, what you're doing is a Transferprojekt, a transfer project. So you're not doing proper research, but you're doing something, working with the public, where research is being transferred to the public." And I'm always like, well, is that not actually the point of research generally? It should be transferred to the wider public. But there's this very conservative idea, you know, and this differentiation and dichotomy between what researchers are supposed to do in their little offices, and then what other people working in the public are doing, and that needs to change.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to teach institutions sometimes.
Yes,
definitely.
we do. Okay, so I want to move on to the final question, because I do want to, there's some questions coming in from YouTube and other places. So the final question is, you know, you two inspire us with some examples of things that you've seen that you think really kind of point to the future, things that you want, examples you want people to know about in terms of good practice around this community engagement piece. Keyna, do you want to start?
Yes, I can start. Well, I have 3 examples in 3 different places. My first example is in Parque Lage, EAV, which is the place that I am the teacher. It's very interesting because we have this program that just started last year and now closed because of the pandemic ways. And we started an Deformation Program, which is free for understanding how you are inside in the world, in the art world. We have 2 classes, and you can be inside of this to understand how you are in the art field. You are an artist, a creator, a writer, someone that only see art, only make part of. And this is a 1-year process, a 1-year project, we can say about it. And it's very interesting because it's for free. We have money inside the structure for give these classes with wonderful professors, different professors, and connect many people. We have open studios, open visitors, and these classes are the classes are open, so the public is coming around and go and see it. What is happen, and we can talk with people. Like, well, we are in a class. If you want to come in, you can. So, and it's very strong how the place that is very touristic place is becoming a touristic and artistic and put inside of this field. Another example that I have is in Bolivia with the Museo Nacional del Arte, which is the biggest museum in Bolivia, and they changed the director. And this new director, Max Jorge Hinderer Cruz, just changed the way to see what is traditional art, what is important art, because they are seen as many Latin Americans museums as European art is the good, greatest art. And the archive and everything is around this art, and the modern art and the contemporary is around it. And then they look at inside of this collection and see, well, let's bring this together. What we miss this people. And so they bring with another languages inside of Bolivia, because it's not Spanish, it's many natives languages. So they start to talk with people in these natives languages. It was wonderful and huge to discuss and connect the people with the collection. Another one is the CCA Lagos in Lagos, Nigeria, with the place that was our beloved Busy Silva, that is a place to understand how can we understand contemporary art inside Nigeria. Now Ireani is the director now, because Busy, if they didn't know, passed away. And we have like a library inside there. Understand art, and be art is read books and be inside of these places and have this. So it's very alive and strong places. So I think these three examples can you can fulfill the ways that we can talk about the past, the present, and the future at the same time.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that, because again, museums are traditionally memory about the past, but it's really exciting to think about them as conduits for us to develop future worlds, to talking about the present and developing future solutions. And I like the way that your examples are really about breaking down barriers between different parts of society, with education, museums, art, it's like breaking down those boundaries so everybody can participate. I really like that. Manuela, did you have some examples that you wanted to share?
Yes, I have several examples, but I'll share one. Because I really I thought about it, and I really have the impression things begin to change. So there are several examples. I mean, there's one I will just state, but for those who are able to understand German, verwobene Geschichten. Verwobenegeschichten.de is a site that you should look at, and a web project which involve people from very different communities in Berlin, and where they worked on creating a web space which looks at the history of the interlinked history of different communities in Berlin at the beginning of the 20th century. And yes, but the example, the main example I wanted to share is something that just started this year. It's a project which I invite everyone to look for. It started this year. It still has the rather bulky working title, Post-Colonial Remembrance in the City, but we'll launch a website soon with a better and more attractive title. And what's really important about this project, it got the funding now this year by the Berlin Senate Department for Culture and by the German Cultural Foundation. And what's really fascinating about it, it's a project that will go on for 5 years. In Berlin, I try to commemorate the history, the colonial history of Berlin with different exhibitions and so on. And I've been part of the project, of preparing the project the last 2 years. And it was a wonderful process because it brought together very different people and institutions. So we had people from representatives of the Initiative of Black People in Germany. We had people from EOTO, Each One Teach One in Berlin, which is a space mainly for people of African descent, a space of empowerment. We had Berlin Post-Colonial, which has been involved in the last years very intensely in the whole debate on decolonizing streets, street names, and also museums and museum collections. And so we had these institutions, these organizations, and then we have in the project also the Berlin City Museum, which is like the well-established institution. And what we did the last 2 years was really working together on common vision of what we want to create for the coming 5 years in critically, reviewing Berlin's colonial past. And I think it's a perfect, it's a perfect example, a very good example for at least trying to come together at eye level, though we have, very different institutional backgrounds. And so, yeah, that's the example I want to share. I'm very excited about it.
Yes, that sounds very, very exciting. And I hope we can find, you said there's a website that's being developed.
You can find it on the web under the name of Post-Colonial Remembrance in the City, but there will be a website with a more catchy title soon.
Great, fantastic.
Oh, great.
Well, we've run out of time. And I know that there are lots of questions. So I just want to say, Tanisha, Jan, John Baptiste Nelson, we will get to your questions at the end. Don't worry. But we have to move on to the next conversation now. So thank you, Keyna and Manuel, for having this discussion with me. And hopefully someday we can be in the same room together.
Yes. Yes.
So. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, we're moving on to the final conversation we're going to have. That's going to include Latika Gupta and Ciraj Rassool. And we're going to be speaking about the future of museums from the perspective of community-based museums and local museums. So Latika Gupta, who's joined us, I hope you can see her, is an art historian, curator, researcher. She's worked at the National Gallery of Modern Art and the KHOJ, International Artists Association. In addition to curating exhibitions of South Asian modern art and contemporary art. She completed an MA and an MPhil in visual culture studies from the School of Arts and Aesthetics in Delhi, and worked as an associate editor of Marg Publications from 2016 to 2020. Ciraj Rassool, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, you can correct me later, is a professor of history at the University of Western Cape and directs the Africa program in Museums and Heritage Studies. He has been on the boards of numerous museums, including the District 6 Museum. Ciraj publishes widely. His latest book is Unsettled History, Making South African Public Past. So I'm really delighted to be able to talk to you guys. Thanks for hanging on throughout the entire conversation.
Hi, Tonya. Hi, Ciraj.
Hi.
Fascinating discussion.
Yes.
Hi to everyone.
So again, I'm going to ask the same questions of you, but from the perspective of kind of community-based and local museums. Ciraj, do you want to start with, what does the future look like?
I know that we've sort of become a little fixated with the museum definition and ICOM, but this is a debate that's been a long time coming. 2012, between 2012 and 2016, we, UNESCO had a process and arrived at recommendations on museums and social transformation that already raised some of these challenges. And essentially, we are talking about a contestation between the old museum, which is the regulatory machine of the government of objects that came into existence from the late 19th century at a time of colonization that is marked by disciplines and where everyone is regulated, which is the government of objects and persons, versus an entirely different idea of museum that has been emerging and that is already in practice in different parts of the African continent, in Latin America, under the banner of social museology, under the banner of micromuseology, under the banner of community museums, and that has been pressurizing, causing a lot of pressure, and which is why that debate eventually fell on the lap of ICOM, which is essentially a regulatory and standards setting international institution. So we mustn't imagine that because the definition wasn't adopted, that there's a defeat. That is absolutely not the case. This is the time of a new museology, which is part of the long process of the decolonization of the world. And the most exciting form that this is taking right now, with the rise to prominence of the debate about restitution, because now all these new projects in Germany and elsewhere on provenance research has to take into account the outcome of restitution. We now know that all of the understandings that we've had about objects being entangled and sharing and all of that, those are neo-colonial approaches. So this is a very different time. I'm very privileged to be a South African, to be in Cape Town, to come from District 6, a neighborhood that was forcibly removed and which has held on to its memory, and through whom a District 6 museum was created, and where we learned a new museology in the everyday activities of the District 6 Museum, in which we learned that a museum is not a collection, a museum is not a building, a museum is a social process, a museum is an interrogative space, a museum is a process of production and ongoing remaking. And so it's a very different concept of museum that we work with today. And at the same time, we have to take note of the important work that's happening in South Africa, in Britain, in Germany, on questioning the legacies of colonialism, questioning legacies of violence that we sit with in the old museums, because these old museums have to rethink themselves. But part of the problem that is sometimes not a focus sufficiently is that while these are regulatory institutions, they're also disciplinary institutions. We have to question colonial disciplines. We have to question the way in which the world is divided up by the museum, in which we allocate certain societies to certain kinds of museums. And I'm afraid in Germany, with the creation of the Humboldt Forum and so forth, those are important matters that have not been attended to.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, what I really like about what you said, and relates to some of the things about my vision for the future is, the museum is a place of process. It's about making, and it's always in the process of reframing, and it's about getting people involved in that process of continually rethinking and remaking. So I really love that concept. Latika, would you like to present your vision?
Yes, so I'm glad that actually you scheduled our panel at the end of the sub-panel at the end of the panel, Tonya. And I completely agree with everything that Ciraj is saying. And I'm coming from the point of view also of somebody who works in a very different context in India. And I made some notes because we're short on time and I wanted to just make sure that we stick to time. So I'm going to refer to those. But speaking of the ICOM definition, what has constantly surprised me is the fact that museums should wait to change until the definition is turned into an accepted mandate. And it's small museums, it's local museums and community museums, like Ciraj says, that have already been doing this work. And surely the sort of the imperative to change should not come from an association that says, hey, now follow these things. And I think that is why I actually have a lot of faith in the fact that local and community museums can actually change society and worlds. I don't believe in thinking about the world as a singular or the idea of a single global world. I certainly don't. So to speak from a very specific context, so I think community museums, more than any other, have the potential to participate and actively drive decolonization within society, and not just through the institution of the museum. Because the reason why communities feel the need to create these spaces, which aren't just about collections, but could well be, comes from a decolonial sort of reason, a need to tell their own histories. And in the previous panel on restitution as ethic and as an ethical and legal challenge, Aisha Sori said something that was absolutely key. In changing narratives of the past, and this is linked to knowledge production or the epistemic violence of knowledge, and also the same violence that is carried out by museums, collections, categorizations. In changing these narratives about one's own past and what we know about ourselves in relation to the rest of the world, we can imagine our own futures in a very real way. And listening to this, I can completely see that that is the primary reason for local and community museums to come up. But also, I have great discomfort with sort of one-size-fits-all, top-down paradigm of decolonization per se. As though it is a model that can be replicated ad nauseum in every single context. And again, speaking of or from a country like India, which is supposedly post-colonial, when we speak of master narratives, these aren't just handed down by our erstwhile colonizer. These include the singular national narratives that are constructed and perpetuated by the state and the government, where culture, collections, and their displays replicate that top-down model or approach. And the questions remain exactly the same. So who speaks for who? What is left out? And this becomes, for me, as it does, I'm sure, for many countries across the world today, absolutely crucial when we have majoritarian, far-right, non-secular governments, with societies that they are pushing into being further sort of divided along lines of caste, class, race. And then how do community museums actually come into that gap? One of the things I did was to look up the stated mandate of the National Museum of India. I find that the mission statements that museums put out are very useful to kind of look at the current operations and practice. And what it says, amongst various other things, is for the National Museum of India to serve as an epitome of national identity. In this country, for instance, indigenous or local communities continue to be treated as performing bodies, whether it's the performance of knowledge or the performance of ritual. And for me, this exactly replicates the colonial imperial exhibitions of the 19th century, the great exhibitions that were happening elsewhere, when natives were put on display. So in India, even now, Adivasis or indigenous people are constructed and displayed as native savages in national displays such as the Republic Day Parade. Mm-hmm. And in this, then, local museums have the space and the ability to let in polyphonic worlds. And for me, that's the basic reason for a museum to exist. It is not to sort of lay out your looted wares and goods and drive the tourism of a city. And these local museums, and funding is a tricky question. I know that Manuela and Keyna talked about it, but they have the ability to lie outside a nation or a politician's concerns and controls, So they become custodians of their own histories, narratives, and the significance that they may choose to give to objects in relation to their contemporary sort of realities that may be. So in many ways, for me, community museums or a vision of the world, or community museums standing as a vision of the world in the future, as a utopian one, is also one that has the ability to either refuse. So you refuse the master narrative, you resist it through the sort of excavating of your own history, through the telling of objects, and also the controlling of archival materials, as the case may be. And what gets shown, what doesn't get shown. So, yeah.
Great. No, thank you. That's really, I think that's a good segue, because you're starting to talk a little bit about the second question, which is what needs to change in the mindset of government, museum sector generally, universities. What needs to happen in order for us to support these community-based museums?
Should I go first or Ciraj?
You go, Latika. Yeah.
Okay. Right. I mean, I guess I'm going to continue with my sort of negative, and I like to think not contrarian point of view as a way of actually hoping that change happens, is that, again, the critique must necessarily move into the question of decolonization within a nation and the position of the citizen or the migrant, as the case may be, and their relationship with histories. So in India, for instance, there are many colonial laws that continue to be used by our government against dissenters, such as an 1870 law against sedition. And those who speak against the government can be jailed for life. Now, this can be in the manner that you may want to construct your narrative if it goes against the national one, the way that you may want to display your idea of culture. These colonial laws are well and alive in this so-called post-colonial country. And in India, one can also talk of border states then, which are seeing classic settler colonialism. Despite being sort of free from Great Britain for more than 70 years, we have some of the most heavily militarized regions in the world. There is a suspension of universal human rights and the usurping of land. Now, I'd say forget about governments. You know, one of the questions that you asked us to respond to was, what needs to change in the mindset of governments, museums, universities, and publics, I like to think, in order to realize this world? I'd say forget about governments. In places, and I will get to it as an example later, where the government is enlightened in order to sort of arm its own citizens to dissent, that's another matter altogether. But I think we need to shift our focus squarely to museums, and I'll make the case for local and community museums, working in tandem with universities. I know that there was a lot of conversation about knowledge and methodology and training. And in that, I think one very specific thing that needs to change is the hiring policies. And this hiring of professionals can only happen when the training is made available. I'm a massive supporter of the idea of positive discrimination in a country like India, where people from communities that continue to be marginalized, that people are given extra opportunities to train, and they are made a part of the table where the conversation is being had. You know, locals, I'm also suspicious of socially engaged work, terminology, socially engaged work, community-based practice, because I think 90% of the time, community becomes a resource for academics who then go to them as native informants, and they have no right to be equal stakeholders in any which way. And I think that needs to change completely. I mean, one of the things I was looking at was Twitter, where almost every single major museum and sort of museum associations are keen to put out a statement supporting the Black Lives Matter movement that's ongoing right now, the uprising, right? And there is plenty of unease and disillusionment with these statements that are being put out. And I'd like to quote from Fanon, who we turn to even now, is that, let us admit it, the settler knows perfectly well that no phraseology can be a substitute for reality, right? So statements mean nothing. I think people need to change who the curators are, who's being spoken to, and nobody should be a local informant anymore, a native informant in that sense.
Okay, no statements, we need action. Ciraj, do you want to talk about how the mindset needs to shift?
Yeah, one of the most important challenges that governments have is to enable a system of governance of museums in which they are not trapped in a statist paradigm, in which museums are not configured as state institutions that deliver the services to the society on behalf of the state. It's a serious danger that we certainly have in South Africa, where museums that are national museums are now configured as agencies of the state, and an arm's length governance situation is completely lost, and that is going to be the death knell of museums. Of course, just to connect with some issues that have been discussed by others, we have to reverse the relationship of expertise between museum and university that has seen the museum as the location of outreach work, which is the English word for what Manuela was talking about in the German case, in which the museum becomes the locus of expertise. This is extremely important if we are talking about democratization, where the museum becomes the space of enunciation, conversation, where democracy is not about voting. Democracy is about developing the powers of critique, of social analysis. And so museum is quite fundamental. The museum is the fundamental space of the public humanities. This is the future of society that we are talking about. And that is why this debate is so important. And we have great examples of how, this is not to, because the gains are fleeting, they are small. District 6 Museum, of course. We have the Museu da Maré in Brazil. There are examples from the last 10, 15 years from Mexico, from Peru, from Chile, I mean, what's amazing is that when we have this discussion in English, we completely miss out on all the developments that have been taking place in Portuguese and Spanish.
Yeah,
in the field of museums. But community, as Latika has said, the concept of community is also a dangerous one, especially when you have colonial legacies. In South Africa, we've got multiple colonial legacies. We speak languages of multiple former colonial powers. And so we have, of course, creolized those languages as well, as Keyna has explained to us. We've indigenized those languages. But we have been, in South Africa, part of the regulation of people into communities was to turn them into races and tribes. And that went along with the creation of the Ethnographic Museum. And that went along with the biological anthropology and the physical anthropology. And all of these were modes of collecting in the museum that have left deep colonial legacies of violence that we have to attend to. And that's part of the healing of community. It is a healing process in which we are remaking ourselves as new persons in new societies outside of the colonial frameworks that colonial states, authorities, and museums have placed people in. And it is a process of liberating the person. So the decolonial project tied to a necessary escalating project of restitution that all of us have to work on as a matter of urgency is a program not just of rescuing the museum, but of making a new world.
If I could just add a small point to what Ciraj
So we
said.
have about, just to say, we have about 2 minutes before we go into the Q&A. Sure. So if you want to, Latika, talk about your examples and any comments you have, that's fine.
Right. Well, actually, just to pick up on what Ciraj said about restitution, I mean, that again, I think is something that needs to be looked at from context to context. So for instance, I'd be the last person to say, our government's drive to bringing back what are almost always non-community objects as a part of the great pride of the country and the quite authoritarian leader then presiding over this culture. I'd rather that for the moment they stay where they are. And there is the question of reparation, or we've talked about relational ethics in terms of building communities, whether it's through museums or whatever other processes for healing on the ground right now. In terms of examples, I want to actually speak about an ongoing project. It's called, and not of local and community museums, but which stands to make a real intervention in one of the largest universal museums. There is the British Museum. It's a project called 100 Histories of 100 Worlds in One Object. This was conceptualized by the historian Dr. Miriam Brucius in collaboration with UCL, Alice Stevenson, and Subhadra Das. And while the starting point is a critique of Neil McGregor's 2010 sort of blockbuster model of history of the world in 100 objects, it goes further than that to say that, look, can we really speak of any history at all using just one object? Do we need to have museums which set up sort of singular iconic objects as representative of cultures? Who's speaking for who, and what sort of history is being handed down to by who? And the other project which I want to talk about is a state museum, which is the National Museum of Jamaica, which I had the opportunity to visit very briefly as part of the 100 Histories project with Miriam and the rest of the group. And again, just to finish very quickly, 20 seconds, one of the exhibitions that we saw was Who Were the Taino, in which the stated mandate was to foster citizen historians who understand their family, community, and national histories. And other 2010 exhibition asked questions which every institution should make part of their primary mandate. What is the role of a national collection? To what purposes are collections built? And what meaning is derived for a changing society? They asked if collections and exhibition narratives themselves are burdened with objects and ideals embedded in the past. And I'll end there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation. We could go on for a long time, but now what we're going to do is have a couple of minutes for Q&A amongst everybody who's been part of this session. So welcome back, everybody. What I'm going to do is, so there's been questions along the way, and maybe the best way to do it, rather than doing it one by one, is for me to just read out some of the questions and for you to be able to give a response based on the kind of totality of the questions. So we had from Rachel Smith, provenance research and being transparent on the collecting practices that founded museums are vital for the future of museums. Do you agree? So that's one question. In a more modern sense, should museums include artifacts of recent immigrant experiences to ease racial and social tensions? That came from Tanisha. Jean-Baptiste has said, what do you think of Teaster Gate community practice as a model of practice of a new museum? I'm not quite sure. I'm not familiar with that, but maybe the rest of you are. What about bringing the museum out, having performances in the streets, taking the knowledge to the schools and the people next door who don't feel invited instead of waiting for them to come? That comes from Jan. Let's see. Nelson says, can we have a new definition of a museum when the old structural system still exists? Tanisha says, this is particularly for Ciraj, for other ethnic groups who now belong to African countries because of colonialism, how can museums reflect our belonging to these countries, even if society doesn't? Are mainstream national museums basically representations of ruling political ideology? Should museums in the Global South boycott museums like Humboldt Forum or the British Museum? How should they take initiative to define their relation to these institutions according to their own needs? Okay, I think I've thrown those out there. Some other ones might come in, but it's a wide variety of things, wide variety of questions. There was one specifically directed at Ciraj. Do you want to just kick off with some reflections on those questions? And the one that was directed towards you.
Yeah, it's an odd question, but anyway. Yeah, the provenance research projects in Germany and elsewhere have been really important. What they've shown, for example, in these ethnographic museums in Stuttgart and Berlin and elsewhere, is just the patterns of collecting history. And so we learn that with objects from Namibia that came from colonial collecting involving soldiers were assembled in a context of violence and were turned into ethnographic objects in Germany. They were made ethnographic, and in fact, more properly, are objects of a genocide history rather than just being ethnographic. So provenance can't just be an enhanced, souped up project of collections management. It's got to be something more than that. Let me also just say that museums have been leaving their walls for some time, and not just through a pattern of outreach or the mobile museum where you go to under serviced communities. This is not about reaching new audiences and so forth. It's a new practice of museology. District 6 Museum is a museum that engages in practices of commemoration, practices of memorial marking. And so this is something that museums do, in which the community is not an audience. The community is the museum. So it's a very different concept of the museum. The practice of the museum is very different. It does not rest on the expertise of the curator, who is the holder of knowledge. Now, when I've spoke about ethnicity, South Africa is a very complex country with complex histories of indigenous formation and of different colonialisms and of the settlement of laborers from elsewhere in another part of the country. In this part of the country, those of us who are of Creole background, of mixed African origin, were determined to be colored. And so as we have rejected that racial category, we have sought to reinvent ourselves as South Africans in a non-racial society, in which this non-racialism is not a matter of post-racialism, in which the very basis is understanding the history of how people were turned into races and tribes. This is a necessary critique that we have to make, because we cannot live inside of the categories that the colonizers placed us in. And so to have simple histories of migration and of diaspora, I think needs to be really rethought. We need to rethink the way in which we can think about people. And part of our problem is that in the Goethe-Institut, for example, it's a conversation I've had with many of their officers, that they have divided the African continent into sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa that is deemed to belong to Asia. And that is a serious problem, because we don't accept that division of the African continent.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna actually go to Léontine, because you were nodding your head, and you're running ethnographic museums. So I was wondering what your reflections might be in relation to Ciraj and the other kind of questions.
I'm not a groupie, but I definitely agree with everything Ciraj is saying, and also the other speakers. And what I liked a lot was Latika's using the phrase phraseology. I really like that critique, that the museum world is using phrases like inclusion and participation and diversity, and people are sort of using it, but they're not really using it, and they're not really working with those concepts that we need to reflect upon critically within our museum spaces. And if we really take those concepts seriously, then they hurt, because it's an institutional critique. It's a critique towards our professionalism. It's a critique towards who we are. It's a critique also, again, towards ICOM. So by using those using those phrases, we think there is a consensus, but there's not. There still are divisions within our museum worlds that we critically need to reflect upon within our institutions, within our national contextualizations, and also in such global organizations like ICOM. And that's why I like the word phraseology or instrumentalization, because you need some kind of wording to get third wave money. So everybody is using those words, but actually they're not really intrinsically stand behind those concepts. And another thing, they were so beautiful words, questions that were more for me rhetoric, because I agree. But we need to have, if we want to if we want to go away from this 19th century putting people in boxes and classifications that we are still dealing with, then we need really have a new kind of governance, a new kinds of restructuring those 19th century projects. And there, because I'm now sort of representing such a 19th century project, there museums like I'm now the director of need to look at community museology, community museum practices, and learn from that and try to adopt that in those tankers. Because if we don't do that, the tankers will not be of relevance anymore in the next 20 years to come. And then even the museums on the museum aisle in Germany can close their doors.
I could just add one more thing, one word to which is, I think, immensely useful in the work that we all do is complicity. And I think if we try to identify how we are complicit and justifying that by either through the idea of, oh, but funding requires this, we need to run this program in order to whatever, we are complicit in perpetuating everything that we claim to be critiquing or as a part of institutional critique. And I'd also just picking up from what Ciraj said, want to give you a tiny example of a museum which is which is a part of a bombed village on the border of India and Pakistan. It's called Hundarman, where the people of that little village decided to make a museum which they call Unlock Hundarman Museum of Memories, in order to counter the national narrative of a Muslim majority state, a Muslim majority district on the border of two nations which are constantly at loggerheads with each other. And by doing this, and exactly what Ciraj said, this wasn't in order to reach out to other audiences, though it could also be that because they do want to tell their story. It is to literally appropriate a sense of their history for themselves so that nobody else can tell it. And in this case, the country can't tell their history, whether it's of the war or a history, a very, very rich cosmopolitan history, which India has deliberate amnesia to or about. Museums, community museums have the power to do that. And I don't understand why non-community museums, universal museums don't do it, except for the insecurity of the fact that they will have to come to terms with the fact that their collections are loot. I mean,
that's probably a factor, yeah.
Any further thoughts on those questions, Manuela? Have any reflections?
I actually just wanted to add something to I think it was the first question on the role of provenance research. Ciraj has said something about it already, and I mean, I agree that provenance research is important in the way that it helps us to get a greater knowledge and understanding of how objects came from colonized parts of the world into European museums, and which stories are involved, which violence are involved, often also the destruction of kingdoms, I mean, of states, basically, you know, when you're thinking about the Benin bronzes and so on. But at the same time, I'm a bit worried about the fact that, especially in the German context, provenance research has become like the solution for everything. And the problem is, you know, I think I was trying to think about numbers, but I'm very bad at remembering numbers. But I guess, you know, when we're talking about colonial objects, we're talking about many hundreds of thousands of objects. So it's basically impossible to do provenance research on all these objects. It's not possible. So it can't be the solution for the question of restitution. And we have to find another solution to deal with that. And that's why, I mean, the proposal by Ferwin Sarr and Bénédicte Savoy is also interesting for the German case, because it has this idea of, returning the burden of proof and so on. There might be other ways, but so what I want to stress is that I find provenance research really interesting and important to, create a bigger knowledge and awareness of what looting actually meant. But it's not a solution for the question of how can we restitute the object. And it can't be, and that's a problem in the German case, it's used as a requirement actually for restitution. So we first have to do provenance research and then we have to restitute it. That can't be the way. It's just not realistic.
So I've been told that we have to wrap up. So Keyna, you have the final word.
Oh my. Well, I was just listening to you all, and I want to thank. And we have one word here in Portuguese, but is not a Portuguese word, which is ginga, that it's like a twist, that is a kind of intelligence of the body that only have who fight and dance. It's not a fight, it's not a dance, it's something. And this kind of intelligence, you can go through your completely integrally body. And this kind of intelligence is something that we can try to do to equalize these values. Like sometimes, of course, we can try to do some issues around restitutions and many things, but like as my kid is going through, have some things that we can not control. And this is good, wonderful, and it's around life and how I know that institution
unpredictability.
Yes, it is good. Mm-hmm. And it's not about you institutions, not people, but have and made of and breathe with people. And
equalize this organism.
Yes, and equalize this intelligence is something that is very important to understand, because otherwise we're going to be like a white saviors, a movement that, okay, I take it off and now I pay you, but no, it's not about only this. Of course I want money, but it's not only this. It's how you use and manage, how we can do this ginga. It's around fight and dance, of course.
Beautiful. I will write it down. It's very inspirational.
That's a really great ending to our set of conversations in this session. I want to thank you all for your participation. And I mean, there's just so much more to talk about. So I am told that at 7:30 tonight, in the Thinking Out Loud space, people can ask more questions. I'm not quite sure how many of the panel can actually be part of that, but some of us will join. So for those of you who maybe didn't get your questions answered, please join us at 7:30. But until then, thank you all for participating and having such a great session.
Thanks
to you.
Ciao, Tonya.
Thank you. It was lovely. Thank you.
See you.
Good to see you.
Next time we'll have the cake.
Thank you.
Precisely.
Yes.
Even for those
Something
of us who are
more
post
sweet.
cake.
Yes.